Spring 17. This is always one of my favorite and more exciting parts of the year. So these projects are not just your standard senior seminar kind of projects. They're quite unusual for undergrads in that we have small teams run by very esteemed environmental professionals working on integrated projects with the idea of some applied outcome at the end of the day. You'll see they're really different forms, but there's some commonality between all of them. We do ask you should have an evaluation form that you kind of write some notes for the capstones. We'll get into the capstones directly afterwards, and that's a really helpful form of feedback. So, very briefly, in order, we're going to have Protecting Nature Through Responsible Finance. That's a capstone led by Jim Bolzano. Clean Energy and Innovation, led by Derek Silvan. And then Leveraging Ecotourism for Ocean Conservation, led by Ayana. So without further ado, Protecting Nature Through Responsible Finance.
What's up, guys? This is great. I'm Quinn Gregory.
I'm Emily Hernandez.
I'm Patrick McNaughton.
I'm Nicole Myers.
I'm Natalie Tesla.
I'm Solon Stock.
And I'm Peter Schott. Our capstone examined the intricate connection of finance, business, and conservation of nature. So today we'll be talking about the protection of sockeye salmon through conservation, finance, and responsible banking in the Columbia Snake River. Next one. To give you an idea of our presentation and our agenda, first we will talk about the background, and you'll get to understand the current threats, needs, and opportunities of our project. Next we'll go into the three market tools: a salmon bond, a salmon fee and certification, as well as microfinance loans. And you get to understand sort of the basic of how we can use those market tools to create a healthier ecosystem, as well as self-reliant tribal communities. And finally, we will talk about required further actions that our project does not cover. And questions will be at the end. Next slide. So the problem that we address is how can we use conservation finance tools to improve salmon populations and protect the tribal communities in the Columbia Snake watershed. Next slide. And to answer this, we are proposing a three-part strategy, which includes a salmon bond, a salmon fee and certification, as well as microfinance loans that CRITFIC, the Columbia River Intertribal Fishery Commission, will implement. And essentially, our outcomes will be a healthier ecosystem, an improved salmon population, as well as self-reliant tribal communities. It's important to note, however, that this is a proposal that we plan to present to CRITFIC, as they have their current and past work in the area has been going on since its creation in 1977. Next slide. So now we'll be talking about our scope of work. Next slide. So the scope of work, we're focused in the Pacific Northwest, specifically the Columbia Snake watershed. As you can see on the map, the two areas of focus are the lower Columbia River, highlighted in yellow, as well as the lower Snake River, highlighted in a light blue. We chose CRITFIC as one of our main stakeholders, as they comprise 25% of the Columbia Basin. CRITFIC is a coalition of 4 tribes that are concerned with managing the fisheries resources, as well as protecting the indigenous rights of its members. We are also focusing on the Snake River sockeye salmon, for which reason Emily will explain. Next up.
Okay, so why Snake River sockeye? Snake River sockeye are listed as an evolutionary significant unit under the Endangered Species Act by the National Marine Fisheries Service. As such, they have critical habitat categories, which include spawning and juvenile resting areas, areas for growth and development to adults, adult migration corridors, and juvenile migration corridors. The 2 other Columbia River populations of sockeye are not at risk of going extinct to the same extent. Additionally, tribal salmon gross sales in 2008 hold about 4 million, and in comparison, tribal salmon gross sales of 2005 were 700,000.
As you can see with the two graphs, the 10-year average of the sockeye adult passage is in the Columbia River on the left is much greater than that of the Snake River on the right. If you look at the peaks for the Bonneville Dam, it's about 20,000. For the McNary Dam, it's about 15,000, whereas for the Snake River dams, Ice Harbor and Lower Granite, it's about 57. Next slide. And now we'll just be discussing the threats in the Pacific Northwest fishery, including climate change, agricultural and industrial activities, as well as dams. Next slide. As you can see in the graph, as water temperature increases, the survival rate of the sockeye salmon decreases. And this is an issue in the Pacific Northwest fishery.
Okay, so the sockeye salmon of the Columbia and Snake Rivers have been enduring threats to their survival since the encroachment of non-native settlers in the early 20th century. The first threat came in the form of logging. In the case of the Little Natchez watershed, and a tributary of the Columbia River, called the Yakima River, is representative of what has happened throughout the region. Logging in the Little Natchez watershed began in 1931, and by 1944, private lands outside of the forest reserve were completely logged. The environmental impacts of logging along a stream or any body of water include increased stream temperature, a reduction in cold water refuge for fish, and a reduction in the beneficial inputs in the form of woody debris. Salmon runs, it was reported in 2004 that salmon runs on the Columbia River dwindled from around 16 million per year to 1 million per year. And when extremely low flows or excessively high water temperatures occur, pronounced changes in salmon migratory behavior and survival rates can be expected. And that is exactly what happened to the sockeye in the Yakima River. In 2008, the Northwest Power and Conservation Council reported that sockeye salmon are extinct in the Little Natchez watershed. Next slide, please. Once logging activities became pronounced throughout the area, the second threat to sockeye salmon came in the form of splash dams. Loggers along the Columbia River wanted to float the cut timber down the river, but ran into difficulties associated with seasonal changes in water flow, and so they came up with the idea of splash dams to confront this issue. Basically, they constructed a temporary dam that allowed it a reservoir to fill with water, and then once they sufficiently filled the reservoir with cut timber, they exploded it with dynamite, and then the very, very heavy logs went rushing down the river, gouging the bottom of the river and destroying the fragile riparian zones. This is an illustration of that. Next slide, please. The third and more contemporary threat to the sockeye salmon population comes in the form of what the EPA calls chemicals of emerging concern. Mercury, DDT and its breakdown products, and PBDE flame retardants constitute this category of chemicals, and they are of particular concern because they are found throughout the Columbia River Basin at levels that could adversely impact people and fish, the fish themselves. DDT and PCBs have been banned since the 1970s, but they persist in the environment, and the EPA reports that fish consumption advisories for these chemicals have been issued throughout the basin for the past several years, and that is also the case with mercury. The presence of these chemicals is not just dangerous for the salmon population, but it's dangerous for the whole ecosystem, as salmon are eaten by otters, eagles, and bears. And persistent chemicals like mercury, DDT, and its breakdown product DDE are widespread in the bodies of plankton because they're at the bottom of the food chain. And this is of particular interest here because salmon, unlike all other species of fish, feed heavily on plankton, throughout their life cycle, making them particularly at risk of these chemicals. In May 2006, the Toxic Free Legacy Coalition performed a study where they tested the hair, blood, and urine of 10 high-profile Washington state residents. They found that each person had at least 26 chemicals and as many as 39 chemicals present in their bodies. PCBs and PBDEs were found in every single person, and 3 of the 10 participants had traces of mercury in their blood system that was dangerous. Next slide, please.
Now we'll be talking about the impacts of dams. So within our project scope, there are 8 dams along the lower main stem Columbia River and the lower Snake River. The 4 dams, as you can see in the map, they're in yellow, located on the lower Snake, are more significant to the scope of our project. So how much of a threat are these dams actually? Well, in a biological opinion by the National Marine Fisheries Service for the Army Corps of Engineers in 2014 concluded that the 4 Snake River dams specifically were obstructing the migration of adult salmon and increasing the mortality of juveniles migrating downstream. As such, the dams are damaging 2 of the critical habitat categories that were mentioned previously, which include adult migration corridors and juvenile migration corridors. Next we have Solal talking about the 3 types of market tools and projects that incorporate our proposal.
So we'll go into more detail about each component of our strategy later on in the presentation, but this is a basic illustration of our project proposal. So on the left, you can see the 3 conservation finance tools that we came up with, and on the far right are the desired project outcomes. So as you can see, the first 2 conservation finance tools, so the salmon bond and the salmon certification and fees, will generate funds that will be funneled through a conservation fund, and we'll explain later on what that exactly entails. And then the fund will be used to invest in projects related to aquaculture and the restoration of riparian zones, a riparian zone being the interface between land and a stream or river. And then in the bottom we have microfinance loans that are more specifically geared towards the tribal entities themselves, and we'll use these to foster entrepreneurship and help them reach economic self-sufficiency. Next slide. And then now Patrick will tell you more about our first mechanism, which is a salmon bond.
Okay, so our first market tool is that of a salmon bond, which is a kind of green bond